Hi, Katie. Welcome.
Thank you.
Well, I'm very excited to talk with you today. You have written a book about childhood trauma, healing that trauma, and the use of psychedelic therapy. So these are all in my wheelhouse. So I'm looking forward to hearing some of your story today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I look forward to the opportunity.
Yes. So tell me a little bit about the book that you wrote and where you're at today.
Yeah, so it's been quite a journey. I'll probably start from the beginning if that's okay, and
Mm-hmm.
because that's what led me to the book. So I was 47 years old. I had really honestly never dealt with my childhood trauma, and I
Mm-hmm.
thought I escaped it. And the methods in which I thought I could escape my childhood trauma were perfectionism, overworking. That was a numbing agent for me. Alcohol addiction. I would sit and drink at the end of the night because that was where my mind was still, and it was very uncomfortable for me. So anytime that I had a free moment, that's where I went. I wasn't necessarily a day drinker, but definitely anytime at the end of the evening to which I was left with myself. That was very uncomfortable. So at the age of 47 years old, we were at a family reunion, and at family reunions, everybody drinks all day. That's what we do. So I think I was probably about 15 beers deep, combined with Red Bull, so I could stay awake because we had been drinking all day. And my 18-year-old son, he is my second child, sat down next to me at the fire pit, and he turned to me and said, "Mom, I can tell that you're really struggling right now. And I don't know how you survived the childhood that you did, but I think it would be beneficial for you to take a year to heal yourself. We got your back. We love you. It's your turn now." And that sort of set this trajectory forward. And both my kids were leaving for school or, moving out of the house. And I was losing my role as a mother. I did not know who I was then. That was one more thing being taken away where it was a part of my identity. And so I had turned to him and I said, "Well, maybe I'll try therapy again." I had done therapy on and off for years. And he said, "Mom, I don't know if that really works for you." He said, "What about thinking about ayahuasca?" And he had never tried ayahuasca himself, but his really close friends, their parents had both done ayahuasca and really had transformative changes. So I started thinking about it. It took me about 6 months to research the use of therapeutic psychedelics in healing. And at that point, I felt very much like I was at rock bottom. So I found myself at rock bottom. And I would call it perpetually numb. I just almost all my emotions were detached from my body, and I no longer recognized myself. I was just going through the motions that we do in our society. And so about 6 months later, I tried a small dose of psilocybin with a trusted friend, and then I ended up doing ayahuasca probably a month later, and I must admit it was with a lot of trepidation. I was really nervous because I knew, uh, the legal substances really well that caused me a lot of harm, which were alcohol and nicotine in particular. Um, but I didn't know anything about psychedelics. I had done them briefly when I was a teenager, and then, just had a lot of fear around it. I think it can be somewhat normal, I think, because we're taught in this society that we don't trust those kind of drugs, if you will. But needless to say, I decided to approach that much like I approach everything in life, where I would do a ceremony every 4 to 6 weeks, and I would attempt to heal myself in a year. It was kind of laughable now, but I had just decided I'm going to go to a ceremony every 4 to 6 weeks. And I chronicled and documented my journey, not necessarily with the intention of writing a book at all. It was not even in my wheelhouse or my mind at the time, but based on my trajectory, I started a blog, and then I gave some of my blogs to a author that's published about 4 or 5 books that were really successful, and I said, "If you could just give me your feedback. People keep saying that I should turn these into a book." And he said to me, "You got a book here, Katie." So I was like, "Okay." And what I also recognized with the book in particular is that there are not very many memoirs out there that document the use of therapeutic psychedelics in healing. There were a lot of phenomenal books out there, like Michael Pollan's How to Change Your Mind and other books out there that had a wealth of resources. But what I noticed, like, for example, when I tried to quit drinking, there was a ton of quit lit. Quitting drinking, there was beautiful books written, but not so much about this experience in particular. And so I was hoping that with my book, I might start a trend so that people could share their stories, because I think the stories are what capture people's attention and motivate them to change their lives in whatever way they can.
So, what was it then during these experiences that helped you make changes in your life?
Mm. It transitioned. With each ceremony, it was different. I think initially, if I think about that first ceremony I went to, the next day I couldn't stop crying. I did ayahuasca and I cried, not like an active cry, but just tears streaming down my cheeks for like 10 hours. And I was like, what in the world? Why won't these tears stop? Kind of getting worried a little bit. So I asked the facilitator, is this normal? And it was like this form of purging. And I hadn't cried for myself or for all the circumstances that I experienced, maybe ever. I was not taught to feel sorry for myself. And I don't even love that language, right? To not even have that self compassion for myself and what I experienced. And so, for example, so starting out, it was just the release of the wounds and identifying what they are and how they live in my body and my psyche and what was happening. Um, I document in the book, for example, that on it was about 6 months into this experience, I heard a voice. There on the first time I ever did psilocybin with a trusted friend, I saw a dark figure standing behind me, and soon after that, my friend said, "Do you want to go look at the garden?" So I took the eye mask off, and I never knew what that dark figure was. And 6 months into the journey, I just heard a voice that said, "Do you remember that dark figure that first time that you did psychedelics?" And I said, "Yes." And I heard a voice say, "That's all your childhood trauma. And you carry that around with you everywhere you go. And it weighs the same amount that you weigh. And it's very heavy. It's a burden. Would you like to get rid of it?" And I said, "Yes, of course." And I had this very beautiful, transformative night where I felt like little blocks moving, like my whole body was being adjusted, really. And I thought, okay, I never need to do psychedelics again. I'm healed, because I was relatively new to the medicine. I thought that's how it worked. And I had paid for the second night, so I went back for the second night thinking, I don't even know what I'm going to work on. I feel like a new person. And the second night I heard, "Katie, you forgot about shame." And I recognized that there's all these original wounds that happen to us as children. Um, and it can come from multiple different forces, and it can come from adulthood, right? From all the things that we experience in this really challenging earth school. But also that uh, healing is nonlinear, that it is like sometimes like a roller coaster, and then it's sometimes these sharp up and downs. And so I sense and feel and know that there are all these steps to getting ourselves whole again, and it's complicated and beautiful. And so each experience was different, like I said, shame, it could be grief. We lost a family member who died by suicide, and that was right around the time that my son approached me. So there are so many beautiful ways to get ourselves as right as we can be on any given day, and I find that they come up. I think I mentioned to you just about, like, boundaries and discernment and, what kind of behaviors I myself, exhibit that maybe I wanna change, or where did this come from? What is the origin? When is the first time that I felt this in my life? What's the source of this? And so for me in particular, the beauty of these medicines and what they have given me is the ability to analyze myself in a new and exciting way, really, because um, I understand that I have a lot more grace for myself and a lot more grace for others, where that was almost non existent, mostly for myself. My inner critic voice was really loud. So,
Mhm.
yeah, so it changes almost every single time. But there's a peace, a stillness, and a resonance that I have never known before.
Mhm. I'm curious, Katie, when you're telling me all this, what are you feeling now?
Mm, I think it's emotional because mm, it's been about 3 years now since I
Mhm.
started this journey, and, I understand the importance of this. I talk about in the book, that each of us we understand that when a child is abused or when we tend to become our own abusers and perpetrators as adults, that can be a darkness that can spread, through ourselves, through our homes, through our families, through our lineages, through our communities, right? It just depends how you engage with the world, right? But I recognize the importance that if we become whole as we can be, I don't know if we ever, I don't want to make big claims, but if we become the best versions of ourselves that we can, then that too has a strength to emanate. And I feel like that's a stronger resonance than where we were maybe stuck in or where we found ourselves at rock bottom, like myself. That there's a power behind that. And I recognize the importance of that. And so I think it's emotional because it's been one hell of a journey, I'll tell you that, you know?
Mhm. So, I mean, I'm just trying to figure out because I can see there's emotion here.
Mhm.
What exactly do you think you're feeling when you're telling me this story?
Mm. It took me a while to get here, but the first word that came to mind was pride. And I think
Mhm.
that for the longest time, I noticed even just recently, I was telling somebody I was having some, uh, you know, gut biome issues, and I was telling someone recently that I was feeling sorry for myself. I use that language exactly. Feel sorry for myself. And they had gently said to me, "How does that language make you feel?" And I said, "Well, I feel bad for myself." And then I shamed myself for feeling bad. Um, I was very much raised, you are tough, you buck up, you don't look back, you keep going forward. And that's what really was part of my demise and also part of my success because I was, from all outside appearances, successful in my life. I had done everything you know, kind of standard. But I also recognize that self love in particular is, I don't know if it's as easy as, just claiming it or whatever. For me in particular, it took a really long process. And it was a missing piece to really be proud of myself for my accomplishments and the moment that got me here with you during this interview, for example. But the act of giving or receiving love is incomplete without that very key piece, that it's not a whole love. And so I think I feel emotional because when I am stating to you sort of everything that transpired over really my lifetime, I'm 51 years old, you recognize the enormity of that big, bold life and that I made it to the other side.
Yeah.
Where often I would say more days than not, I never thought I would make it to this age.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah. So you carried around a lot of pain
Mhm.
from all that stuff that happened. I'm curious, what did you end up doing with all that pain?
Hmm. Processed it, transformed it, became a phoenix rising from the ashes. Um, some of the pain that was given to me by others, I sent it back to them, returned to sender, recognizing that it was never mine to carry. I think, with the different forms of abuse, because when I was growing up, I had physical, verbal, sexual abuse was in my background, drug addiction, it's just sort of the whole thing. Um, not we did not grow up with any real protective parents, and we moved, I think, 30 times by the time I moved into my current house, which I've lived in for close to 30 years. So I moved a lot as a child, but I think that it was a process, and like I said, just transforming that, recognizing it. Where does it live in the body? What are the habits that support that pain? But also, I think that recognizing that this incredible life that I have now would not have been possible had I gone through that. Um, and I'm very grateful now that I had that experience and that my life was so, um, it was, when I wrote the book in particular, I'd moved so many times, it was hard to even make a chapter flow into the next because I was confusing the editors in terms of, didn't you just say you were in Saipan, but then you moved back? I don't, I had moved so much. And so I understand that my life is so complicated that I had to really turn it into a book of short stories so as not to confuse the reader, but that also, that I was able to meet all these incredible people and have this incredible life that I do now, and I recognize the beauty in that life now, because not only have I done the work, but I've had that past where where you've come from, right? We lost our place where we were living, we grew up with little food, I was abused, sort of all those scenarios that give me a profound amount of gratitude for the home that we have and the stability that I've created and the community that I have and all the things that are the light that kind of come out of that darkness. And who knows what kind of life I would have had I not experienced that in my childhood. So, in many ways, it actually feels like an initiation of sorts.
Mhm. Is it possible to walk me through what this transformation of this pain that you carried around and the patterns of that trauma that you had adapted to, how did you transform that into this gratitude and pride that you're talking about?
Hmm. Uh, one step at a time. Oftentimes, when I would go through, like, for example, one of the hardest things for me to work through is that I was always extremely busy. I was addicted to stress, high stress, and which meant that I got a lot of stuff done. Founded a couple nonprofits and did really well. Worked in local food systems, helped really cool regenerative and organic farmers be successful. And that was kind of my pride and joy, but my passion also was uh, eating me alive in many ways because I didn't know balance. So right now, what I'm working on is balance. Like, how can I go out within the garden that I spend hours gardening and just enjoy it as opposed to planting or pulling weeds or doing all the things that need to be done. So numbing for me was a big thing. That came from pain. Numbing in all its many forms, and I mentioned alcohol, nicotine, overworking, overeating, um, and almost anything I felt like I could get my hands on to just sort of get me away from any sort of thought process outside of, okay, I gotta take the kids to the field trip now. Now I gotta, do this. And I would high five myself at the end of the day in the mirror, like, holy shit, you got a lot done. You're pretty amazing. Um, joking.
Deriving a sense of value from what you do.
Hmm. Yep. And not for who I was or who I
Mhm.
am. and not slowing down enough to actually recognize, who am I? What do I like to even do? That question oftentimes perplexed me. Who am I? And I think that it wasn't necessarily easy, but it's been worth the slow walk to figure out who that person is and who they are becoming, and feeling an embodiment in my own body that I had never known before. And so I think that for me in particular, it was like I didn't really express rage. That was not something I felt very comfortable with. I think it can be really uncomfortable. I don't want to generalize, but for women in particular, it's not something that we're maybe known to carry as a regular basis in terms of our emotional toolkit. And so boundaries in particular and discernment, recognizing that sometimes I like Anne Lamott's line that help can be the sunny side of control, that I would often try to go above and beyond and get the accolades and validation from people in terms of like, Kitty, you're doing such a good job. So I would seek that validation. The irony, and that I'm actually writing the second book right now, and the irony is that when they would express those words to me, those words in particular would oftentimes fall flat. Like I didn't
Mhm.
know how to receive it because I was just striving for more. Like, what can I do more of? What can I do better? It's like chasing the perfectionism um, to the nth degree. And honestly, I sometimes wonder if that was a way for me to escape my childhood. Like if I seemed like I was a great mother and a great nonprofit executive director and all of the things, that nobody would know about what happened in my past, including myself.
Mm.
And I recognize that what that looks like now is that freedom and liberation, because when I wrote this book, I left the nonprofit executive director role, which I founded. That was my baby, and I left that nonprofit. I changed and shaped a lot of my relationships. I slowed down. I thought I was extroverted, and it turns out that I'm really not. That I am sometimes. That I can be a little bit of both, but that I actually enjoy staying at home. I was even in this journey when I wrote this book in the year after, because I had a spiritual awakening kind of after this year ended. I would travel around a lot and do ceremonies. I went to South America and Costa Rica, Colombia, just really all over. And then I became a seeker, almost like that was what I was kind of going above and beyond. So I almost transitioned from mom and nonprofit executive director to seeker. And just recently, probably in November, I felt like I was Forrest Gump, where he's at the end of the marathon and you're like, okay, I'm tired. I'm tired. And so recognizing like, okay, I just, transferred all my energy from these things into this. And
Yeah.
now I just want to put the energy into healing, healing and, finding a good day wherever I can. And so that's been a really cool process. And I think really part of my growth too. But I relied on intuitives, shamans, therapists, massage therapists, cranial sacral. Like I kind of went a little bit down the rabbit hole in a really good way. I think it served me at the time, and it was beneficial, but I also recognized that I wasn't relying on myself for those answers. And
Mhm.
so I was looking for an outside source to give me guidance on my own life.
Yeah, perhaps a new version of that perfectionism or the accomplishment that you were talking about, the external validation.
Hmm. Like you're gonna get a gold star, at the end of this or something.
Hmm. Yeah, all of that comes back to that exact same wound that you were talking about in childhood, which was I was never good enough for who I was.
Hmm. Yep.
So, what do you do to take care of yourself today? How do you express and process your emotions today?
Yeah. I didn't recognize my throat chakra for years. One of my things is that I did have a successful career and did a lot of amazing work, but I noticed like if I had to speak to the media or anything like that, I could not use my voice. I just was so nervous. Um, so I was really good at playing small and even yeah, just playing small, kind of not speaking up for myself. That was my jam. People pleasing was also part of that. So I recognize that how I show up for myself today is a lot different. That I am getting more comfortable. I wouldn't say completely comfortable in using my voice. Like this podcast is a good time because I feel a little bit more comfortable. It's an embodiment of knowing that I also embody the divine and that energy if I believe it to be true. And what it looks like is also gardening and spending time with the earth, which is a huge part of my journey. Wouldn't be where I am today without the medicines from the earth that really shifted my core. And so I express that gratitude in gardening and growing and tending and really becoming restoration ecologist to my own self in a lot of ways. So it's not always perfect every day. So, like, for example, I may work outside and it's like 6 hours and I recognize, okay, I need to drink more water. I need to just go lay on the grass on a blanket, with the dogs surrounding me and enjoy this, what I've done. It could be writing. It could be reading at the end of the night, whereas in the past I might have watched a TV show and a few years ago be drinking. Now it's like reading a book, meditating, um, connecting with deeper friendships. I noticed that I'm really interested in the really real right now. And I don't necessarily love, discussions about the weather anymore. So that's shifted. And so I think just getting enough sleep too and exercising. And, even it was in the grand finale of this journey where I was like, and so at the end of the year of healing, where, I did that every 4 to 6 weeks, I literally got in a car accident that same week. Somebody hit me going 40 miles an hour and spun me around an intersection. They ran a red light. And I kinda thought, "Okay, this is my next year's spending time on the body," but I didn't really understand how critical the body was up until probably 6 months ago, where I had, my gut biome was off, and I had to figure it out, and I understood how this body, can be a divining rod, right? And for these really spiritual experiences and how critical of a component it is. And it feels, people say meat suits and that we're walking around in meat suits, but you think about the complexity that exists and the importance of it. So yeah, it just feels like that taking care of the body in particular is where I'm at. And so I stepped away from I do energy work and I'm writing the second book, but above and beyond that, and I facilitate from time to time. I'm licensed in Oregon or soon to be Oregon and Colorado, but needless to say, I'm in the process of just slowing down so I can find that balance that I never knew before. So,
Mhm. So you mentioned a couple of times that you're trying to find who you actually are, and you're talking about slowing down right now. I'm curious, when you do turn your attention inward, what do you find there? What's your relationship with yourself?
mm, I think a deeper connection and a love that I've never known. I would say I didn't really experience self-love until just recently, where I, the connection with myself, I think, is I know myself better. I know what resonates for the most part and what doesn't, and it's still a learning process. I'm not gonna claim that it's perfect, but, what I value, what brings me a lot of joy, and what can potentially harm me, and what's not safe for me right now. I feel almost as if sometimes I'm in a recovery program where I have to be really soft and gentle with myself and with the situations that I put myself in. Um, Not to say like I'm in dangerous situations or anything like that, but right now I'm not going to go to a bar or, I'm just not in resonance with that right now. So, needless to say, I think a deeper appreciation of this life. So when I sit with myself, that feels true to me right now. And yeah, and kind of a change in feeling like I get the opportunity to do this work so that I can share it with others in whatever way is meaningful for me and hopefully for them. And yeah. So,
Hmm. So if you're being very conscious and cautious of the things that you're doing and the things that you're letting into your life, you're talking again about boundaries. What is your relationship with boundaries looking like today?
yeah. Yeah, that's a really good question. And it's a super interesting one because you think or for me, I thought, "Oh, I'm creating boundaries and I've got better discernment," but it's kind of hard, you know?
Mm.
Sometimes it includes family members, close friends, or things that you've tolerated for way too long, which can be really challenging, and you're recognizing like, "Oh, geez. Oh, no, I've just been, this is probably" like, for example, um, I had a friend I worked with for years, and she had said to me, I saw her and she said, "Oh, we've got to have coffee." I said, "Okay, I hear you. I'll just shoot you a text." And I told that to her, and I sent her a text, and she just hadn't responded, didn't respond, and she's done that a number of times over our friendship, like more than a handful, and I recognize like I just don't have energy for that anymore. Like, it feels disingenuous. And so even that little fine tuning about, like, I wanna be cautious and my energy is precious, as is everyone else's. So I wanna make sure that I'm the type of person that shows up when I tell someone I wanna have coffee, that I'm gonna mean it. And that when someone says that to me, I want them to mean it. And it's also about valuing our time and our energy and who we are as individuals. So I noticed that there's those little things that come up, and also, um, just watching how people treat me and how I treat other people, and being more aware than I have been in the past of my words and the power of those words. And but it's tough work, boundaries in particular. I have the energy work practice, and so I'm constantly running into people that struggle with this themselves, and it's a process. And I think that that self-love component or valuing ourselves is really important in this path to ensure that we're bringing the energy that we are worthy of receiving. And yeah, boundaries in particular has been a really interesting one.
Yeah. They can be very threatening in lots of ways, especially if we learned that boundaries are dangerous. And when we start to set boundaries, especially with people who have benefited or have at least had the relationship of us not having boundaries, as it tends to threaten our relationships, as you're noticing. How are you working through that for yourself when you're talking about protecting your own energy and having boundaries so you don't expend your attention and your emotions in places that you don't want to? How are you working with yourself with setting these boundaries when they're difficult?
Well, I think for years I didn't really rely on my own intuition, and it's been pretty safe. But now that I'm recognizing like, "Oh, this resonates," or you know how, uh, you get an invitation to a barbecue or, whatever it is, and you're like, "Man, I really don't feel like going." But you say yes anyway. And then you're dreading it the day of, and then you go, and then it's, probably kind of whatever you expected or whatever. And then you're like, damn it, why I did it again? I wasn't supposed to do that. So I'm really trying to recognize, like, does this resonate with me right now? What is my intuition telling me? Is this a hell yes in this moment? And if it's not, recognizing that that's probably not the best use of my energy. And so I think that for the longest time, especially with my childhood, I did not feel safe and protected. For the longest time, I spent my energy trying to figure out, why don't I ever feel safe and protected? Geez, I live in a safe neighborhood. I got 4 dogs. Nobody, why am I not feeling safe? What I recognized, and then I had the gut issues. And, for me, that's where my little hardened shell was that was keeping myself like, you're not really safe and protected. Probably that inner child, and they're going, we're not safe. We're not safe. And what I recognize through this process is when I say yes to things that do not resonate, or people or energies at that time that do not resonate, not saying they're bad, but they just don't, we're not on the same frequency at that same moment. When I say yes, when I really mean no, I am not keeping myself safe. I am not protecting myself. So how can I recognize that the adult in me needs to take over and use my voice, and the no needs to be a complete sentence, and that it's really important? And I think for me in particular, I'm in this really kind of tender time where I'm just coming out of that whirlwind of traveling the world and writing a book and, doing all the things and changing my entire life in all the best ways. And I need to recover from that. I need some slowness. I need some stillness. I need to figure out what balance looks like. And even that process in itself needs to be guarded and protected. And so yeah, so for me it's like, how can I feel safe, and how can I create a safe container so that I can, that little cocoon, so I can fly out like a butterfly one day and it'll just come naturally to me, because
Yeah.
yeah, it's
Saying
important.
no,
Mhm.
protecting yourself, giving
Mhm.
yourself the thing that you needed that you didn't have.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's not as easy as it sounds, is it?
No, it's not. And it can be somewhat heartbreaking too, right? Because for me in particular, like let's say I have friends that I hung out with, and our thing was to go to a bar after work. And they're still going to the bar after work, and they wonder, why doesn't Katie ever come here anymore? And I don't fault them at all, right? And you think about it, and they're happy doing their thing, and everybody should have the opportunity to live their life how they best see fit. My life just transitioned. So it's not really about necessarily maybe even them per se, but the activities that feel like they're not in alignment with my soul's growth at this time.
Sure. Yeah, you got to choose where you're going to have the pain at. So,
Hmm.
setting the boundaries, you lose relationships, you lose dynamics, you lose things that you once valued or at least enjoyed or had some connection in doing.
Hmm.
But if you don't set the boundaries and you do the thing, then you hurt much longer all the way down the road. So it's choose, when do you want it? Do you want it to hurt now, or do you want it to hurt later? At least here you get a little bit of choice in that matter, and then you can work through it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think I think talking about the reason that it's hard is because some relationships end, some change,
Hmm.
some will never be the same. And it's like breaking up with maybe, you know, 10 friends at a time. Who knows how many? But you break up with all these relationships or they change, and there's a mourning period that has to come with that.
Hmm.
But I think at the end of the day, what I just barely realized, I'm embarrassed to say almost, is like I wasn't keeping myself safe. I wasn't keeping myself protected. And then I constantly questioned, why don't I feel safe?
Why does that embarrass you?
Well, that one in particular, I don't know. So, I don't know if it embarrassed me per se, but it's just like sometimes it's kind of funny as I go through this journey. I think that how I'm meant to learn this process in particular is like on the job training. Going through it, where I could read a book by Mary Magdalene, Mary Magdalene Revealed, or a book on shamanism, let's say, and I'm just like, oh, geez, it's right here in writing. And I learned it through doing this. But in all honesty, I think that that's how I learn best. And that one in particular, it was kind of frustrating me because I was like, why don't this is kind of silly. Why don't I feel safe and protected when I have all these things that make me, could make a person feel safe? And it wasn't until I recognized, I'm not doing it for myself. When I say yes every time I mean no, I'm not keeping myself safe. When I put myself in situations that don't feel good or around beings that might not be the healthiest at that time and that may cause harm, I'm not keeping myself safe.
Yeah. And so, in that light, then recognizing areas where you're not keeping yourself safe would be a wonderful thing to see,
Mhm.
such as how do you treat yourself when you realize those things? So,
Mhm.
if somebody like, if you were learning something when you were a kid, for instance, and your parents were embarrassed of you, that probably wouldn't feel very good.
Mhm.
So, yeah, here's where we can continue to see those patterns.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
What are some areas in your life where you're struggling with, perhaps still not able to, or learning to say no to?
I'd say the biggest one is I tend to overdo almost anything if I get my little grubby hands on it. And I mean like, I got soil under my fingernails right now and I get lofty goals and just recognizing like it doesn't always have to be done in one day or in one season that um that I can slow down and it's okay.
Yeah,
I
there's
think
that
a
pattern
lot
right there.
Yeah, totally. I think a lot of my issues maybe stem from, like, the women in my family in particular. They were always like, "Don't ever trust a man. Don't trust a man. You earn your money. You don't rely on anybody." And,
Did you say you're in Oregon?
uh, I was born and raised in Oregon and then
Yeah,
moved to Idaho. But,
yeah.
they
There's a culture over there. I lived in Oregon for 10 years, and there's very much a culture of we do not like men. So
Yeah.
that
Well, and I
explains.
love men, I mean, I wouldn't be where I'm at, honestly,
Mhm.
without some really healthy men in my life, and some of my best friends are men. So I didn't grow up in I think of the Little Rascals, the He-Man Woman Haters Club or Man Haters Club, but I didn't grow up I mean, I grew up in that because the women in my family chose men that were toxic and unhealthy and abusive, and unfortunately, they put themselves in a situation where not trusting their partner was, part of the deal. So you always earned your own money and you did that. For me in particular, I am so blessed now that in my adulthood, some of my best friends are men. I've got a phenomenal husband and a son that, I'm very, very proud of. Um, and so I believe in balance. But so when I say that they were like, you don't trust men, it's because the human beings that they chose weren't the most trustworthy. So, but I think that I can't even remember where I was going with that, where I got off on that track. But
Yeah, we were talking about what are the difficulties in terms of saying no, or what are the things that you're working on?
oh yeah, so it's also like that not trusting, even my husband saying, "Go write the second book. Why are you working so many hours at a nonprofit? Just you need some time. You've worked hard your whole life." Um, like, if the lack of feeling valuable if I'm not producing income.
Hmm.
I'm producing income, but it's not nearly what I was. So I think that's some of the struggles is finding that balance and finding value outside of the society that trains us that you are,
Yeah.
valuable by producing what you make,
Hmm.
how much you accomplish, finishing that
Yeah.
marathon. And so the point right now that I'm trying to get at is reducing hurry and worry.
Hmm.
Um, and recognizing that the value if I want to align with um, the divine source, whatever you will, and the earth, that means that I can't be cluttered in my brain. That just muddies the water. And that's my motivation right now, and also understanding that how critical it is, like, I feel like as a society as a whole, the farther that we get away from Earth and, that spiritual connection in whatever way, whether that be a tree or sky or, bird, whatever, nature, then the more lost we get as a society. So
Yeah. Perhaps we could even boil that down to trying to find value internally without
mhm,
having to do all the external things.
mhm. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's that one's hard, because well, for me anyway, we've been conditioned our whole lives to believe that that is very important. And so it's like, how do I back away from cell phone usage, let's say, being on my email too much? How do I, step away from the TV, whatever it is? And because it's like we're all being programmed in some capacity to grab our attention. So,
Yeah. It's seductive and it's rewarded in our society, which is if you ever don't feel like you're good enough, then you can go into the world and you can work and you can accomplish things and then you will be good enough. Or you can buy things and you'll be good enough.
mhm,
So yeah, the real practice here is figuring out how can I be good enough without having to do any of that stuff? How can I be good enough just for being who I am? That's the
mhm.
practice.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that I give myself grace because of the background that I had, and kind of how I lived my life for so many years. It's almost like I was programmed and now I'm unprogramming myself, deprogramming myself. So,
Yeah. Well, Katie, tell me, where can people find your book or anything that you're putting out?
um, so when the universe holds your hair back is the book
Is that a
title.
picture of you?
Yeah, so I'll hold it up. Mm, sorry about that. I had a cough, but yeah, I put my picture on the front because I wanted people to see the origin of where this what happens to children and how it impacts them as an adult. So when the universe holds your hair back is available on Amazon. I also did the audiobook, so it's on Spotify and Audible on a bunch of major channels, and Ingram Spark, so it's available in a lot of different retailers, Barnes and Noble. And I also do energy work, so I have peace and fire healing. And so I help other people process, before or after ceremony or just, in their everyday life. And so that's been a part of my practice as well. So my website's again, peaceandfirehealing.com.
Terrific. Well, Katie, it's been lovely chatting with you. I really wish you the best in figuring out these things that you're working on here. I'm sure that there's a lot of things that are going to open up in the near future for you as long as you keep going through with it. So I'm wishing you the best. I hope you enjoy and thank you for your time today.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate the opportunity. It was lovely.